I see. Jesus will. Jesus will. Oh, who will make all my decisions for me? Jesus will. Oh, Jesus will. Who opens doors?
Good morning. Good morning. It's another edition of Politics and Grits with Kevin Peterson. It's Thursday, first summer day in June of 2022. Every 8 a.m. on Thursday mornings, we're here, Politics and Grits at Boston Praise Radio 102.9. We're celebrating the summer season. We had the opportunity over the weekend to celebrate Juneteenth. And I had the chance to get out to a number of the Juneteenth celebrations, sort of ranging from the Nubian Square parade on last Friday to the Juneteenth celebration at what some people call the Big Head Museum down in Roxbury on Walnut Street, where there was a wonderful ceremony where our new U.S. Attorney, Rachel Rollins, spoke to a significant gathering there at the museum. Then we had the opportunity to have somewhat of an interfaith gathering, Juneteenth gathering on City Hall Plaza on Monday, the federal holiday. We thank Mayor Wu for providing the support and the city's team to help us set up and give us power for the microphones. And she couldn't make it, but she sent some representatives out, sent her photographer out. We want to thank Mayor Wu for supporting. And then we had the opportunity through Mayor Wu's input and support to light up City Hall in the red, gold, and green liberation colors. So City Hall has been lit up all week, sort of reflecting liberation and emancipation, as we had a interfaith and inter-ethnic gathering of faith leaders across the city there on City Hall Plaza. One of our guests this morning, who's running for Senate, we're going to talk about that a little later, Reverend Culpepper, was one of those speakers on Monday night. It was a good time. And everyone was aglow, at least in the black community over the last week, as word was getting out that the city of Boston had officially apologized for its role in the slave trade, its complicity in supporting the slave trade over the year, and its complicity around supporting forms of systemic racism throughout the course of the life of this city. It was a wonderful thing to witness last Wednesday in the city council, where the vote was unanimous that the city of Boston should apologize. And then there were a number of other clauses and phrases that were part of that apology that we in the city can use to move the city forward towards reparation and eventually reconciliation. One of the things that stood out, of course, was that clause around addressing anti-black symbols within the city of Boston. And everyone who listens to this show knows that we're talking specifically about Faneuil Hall as an anti-black symbol. Faneuil Hall is named after Peter Faneuil, who was a white supremacist. And we cannot deny his negative relationship to black people. It's in the history book. And we should not have his name, the name of a white supremacist, adorn the building of a publicly owned building. The city owns what we call Faneuil Hall. The activists have started to call it Slave Traders Hall. But it's a shame and it's an embarrassment to the city that his name is still a part of that edifice, despite all the things, positive things that have happened there. abolitionist movement flourished there, as well as the suffrage movement. But Peter Faneuil did nothing to advance democracy or freedom for anyone. And as our friend Cornel West has said, Dr. West has said about the Faneuil Hall movement, we should change the name to someone who's fought for freedom. So we continue to push, and this apology that was issued last week talks about addressing the city of Boston, the city council addressing anti-black symbols across the city. So that was really good. Just as one other update, we're going to have a great Frederick Douglass reading on 4th of July. The Boston Harbor Fest, the city of Boston has specifically asked the New Democracy Coalition to host and manage the reading of one of Frederick Douglass's more famous speeches, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. So we're going to have 56 readers down at downtown Crossing, over near where the old Filene's used to be. We want to invite the community to come out to that reading, July 4th, 1 p.m., as part of the day-long ceremonies and events that the city and the Harbor Fest are hosting, beginning with the reading of the Declaration of Independence in the morning at 9 a.m. Then we're going to have the reading of the Frederick Douglass speech at 1 p.m. downtown Crossing. And then everything shifts over to the Esplanade, where there will be the Boston Pops and the fireworks later that evening. So we're pleased that the New Democracy Coalition have been invited to create some inclusion, a different perspective around 4th of July from one of the nation's more important figures in terms of the development of our democracy, Frederick Douglass. So I want to invite folks to come. There still is a chance to be a reader, but I want you to come. We're inviting youth. There are free T-shirts, free ice cream, and other events. We're going to have some gospel music and some jazz and some spoken word that's interspersed between all of that. So I want to invite the community to come out to 4th of July reading of the Frederick Douglass's speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. We have this morning our Reverend Miniard Culpepper. We're starting a series where we're interviewing the various candidates who are running in the 2nd Suffolk District race for Senate in the state of Massachusetts. There is no senator representing the geographical parameters of the black community in Boston. The senator who was representing it is leaving. She's running for governor, Sonia Chang Diaz. The district has been reconfigured and redesigned to look like it was somewhat about 30 years ago. The district now includes parts of Hyde Park and Rosendale and Mattapan that were not included when it was first created in the early 70s. And so this is a historic race where we're in some ways going back to the future and having this district, the black community, reunited within a specific senatorial parameter, political parameter, senatorial district, the 2nd Suffolk District. One of the candidates who is out there is well known to many of you in the audience. I want to welcome to the Politics and Grits program, his first time, his maiden voyage, so to speak, to this program. I want to welcome the Reverend Miniard Culpepper. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Thank you for inviting me, Kevin. It's been some time. I've been listening to Politics and Grits for some time. I was just wondering when I was going to get invited. The grits part of the program is significant to me because we were all raised on grits.
That's right.
And so when I hear Politics and Grits, it takes me back to some of the early days of my life when we had grits and we had to eat grits. We didn't have a choice. But I look at Politics and Grits. Politics has been part of my life for a long time, and I just thank you for allowing me to come on the show and talk with you about what's going on in the city of Boston and the second subject
get
district.
into that. One question we occasionally ask some of our guests, Reverend, is what do you put on your grits, or what do you like with your grits? So it ranges from people sometimes depending on where they are from the South. In the South, so those folks who are Gullah or Geechee say we got to put shrimp in the grits, right? So that's the question for you this morning. Let's start with that. What's the compliment that you take with your grits?
Well, it's interesting because I was never really a grit cooker. I can cook pretty good now, but it was just I never really cooked a lot of grits. But I did learn something about grits. When you do cook them, that you have to keep stirring.
Yeah.
You can't stop or you're going to get lumps in your grits. And so I learned to just keep stirring. And part of that is the whole approach to life. You got to keep stirring it up until you get to the point where the grits have settled. And when I think about grits, my father's from Georgia. They like catfish.
Yeah.
I love catfish and grits.
Okay.
With just a little butter on those grits.
Yeah.
But I've got to have some catfish with those grits.
There you go. So now we know. Well, let's get to the that was a very, very smooth answer to that question, because you brought us into how you think about politics in a way, and how you think about your engagement in terms of the city life and civic life, and even the faith aspect of the city within the black community. You have decided, after many years of doing pastoring and many years of engaging yourself in the community, particularly around, as I know it, public safety, you decided to run for what I would think the highest office in the black community, the state senate, elected office, I should say. It's a lofty office which wields enormous power in terms of the person who is elected that position being able to set the agenda for the black community in particular, and for the state's black community, not only this district in Boston. You decided to do it, and the first question that came to my mind when I heard that you were running, is why have you decided to run for the Senate?
Kevin, thank you for that question. I've been asked that, and I've discussed it many times. As you know, I was regional counsel for HUD for 27 years. I oversaw all of the lawyers in New England, considered Region 1 for 27 years. I pastored the church. This Sunday is my 26th anniversary. We did a lot of great housing things at HUD while I was regional counsel. And when you think about the things that we did with regard to housing, I believe now we're in a housing crisis. Mm-hmm. When you think about gentrification and you think about the city of Boston and you look at the way the communities are shifting. I remember when I was in law school, I lived on Greenwich Park in the South End. I could afford to live on Greenwich Park as a law student. Today, when you look at the cost of rents, for instance, on Greenwich Park, it's just astronomical and it's unbelievable. We did a lot of great things at HUD, especially when it came to the demonstration disposition program, and it came to places like Academy Homes. One of the things I said while I was at HUD when I came from Washington, you got to remember I was on Capitol Hill as the chief of staff for Congresswoman Collins. I came home because my mother had breast cancer, so I had to come home to take care of her. But when I was appointed as regional counsel, one of the things that was happening is Congress had created a statute for all major cities to develop a program. In Boston, the program was called the Demonstration Disposition Program. And what I said was I would not leave HUD until the Demonstration Disposition Program was finished. The Demonstration Disposition Program was geared to transfer multifamily developments that were in HUD's inventory transfer ownership to the tenants. And so when you look at Academy Homes, Academy Homes originally wasn't in the demonstration disposition program, but I fought with Washington. You know, I've got a history of making good trouble. That's one of the reasons why I want to go to Beacon Hill, to make some good trouble, so that when you make good trouble, good things happen with the people you're fighting for. I've been fighting in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, South End, all of my life, Hyde Park, all of my life. And so when you look at Academy Homes and you look at what we did with Academy Homes and 18,000 units in the city of Boston, a lot of folks think that was city money going into rebuilding those properties or state money. No, it was federal money directly geared to transferring the multifamily developments that were in HUD's inventory. And the way those developments came into our inventory is that the owners defaulted on them. And because there's HUD insured, HUD pays off the development, the mortgage for those owners, brings those developments into their inventory. So when you think about Academy Homes and you think about how run down Academy Homes became over the years,
I remember, yeah.
It was because the owner had defaulted. HUD paid off that mortgage for that owner. The owner walks away scot-free. HUD brings those developments into the inventory. So we had 18,000 units in our inventory. Congress created the program to transfer ownership to the tenant organizations. So Academy Homes, we demolished it, rebuilt it, brand new, designed it with the tenants' help, transferred ownership to the tenants. So the Tenants Association now owns Academy Homes.
And they don't have where is Academy Homes, by the way?
It's right on Washington Street, down by Eggleston Station.
Yeah, in Roxbury. So that would be part of the 2nd Suffolk Senatorial District, also, right?
Yes.
So you were involved in the transition of those homes from what was probably we can call them a slumlord to a certain extent, to the redevelopment and then the home ownership by black folks.
I was
right?
a lawyer that wrote the exception. There's a statute that's called the Federal Acquisition Regulations. Any transfer of property has to go through the FAR, we call it, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. I wrote the exception that allowed HUD to transfer those developments without having gone to the FAR. The FAR would have taken many years. It's a procurement statute. We wrote an exception that allowed us to transfer directly to the tenants at Academy Homes. The thing about it is, when you look at gentrification, the tenants at Academy Homes don't have to worry about getting an eviction notice saying that they've got 60 days. They don't have to worry about the rents becoming so high that they can't afford them. Same thing with Canfield Gardens. It's now Canfield Estates.
That's in the lower South End?
Right behind People's Baptist. Did the same thing. Demolished it, tore it down, built it back up, transferred ownership to the tenants. So even though they're in the South End, and one of the things that we tried to do, I talked to the tenants, I thought that because of the amount of money we were paying per unit to rebuild Canfield Gardens, that we could build single-family homes at the development down on Harvard Street. That land was vacant at the time. But the tenants wanted to stay in the South End. They wanted to stay at Canfield Gardens. So we rebuilt it. It's now Canfield Estates. Again, transferred ownership to the tenants. I oversaw making sure that the development was transferred. As the leading attorney in New England, we wrote all the documents, we reviewed everything, we approved everything to make sure it was transferred to the tenants. The tenants at Canfield Estates now own that development. The apartments on Seaver Street, Franklin Park, they're no longer Franklin Park, they changed the name. We transferred ownership after renovating them to the tenants. And so when you look at the 18,000 units that we did, and you look at gentrification and the way the cost of rent and the cost of living in the city of Boston continues to rise above the means of folks like us, we have to begin to come up with solutions that will
talk
stabilize.
About some of those solutions as part of your campaign vision. How are you communicating to people who would vote for you around housing and stabilizing the black community?
So we're going to release my housing policy probably
You
tomorrow.
You can release it now.
And I'm going to talk
You
about it. I'm
now?
going to talk
Okay,
about
this is
it.
the first time we're hearing it.
So with regard to the housing policy, I want to do the same thing that I did at HUD with the federal government, with the state, and with the federal developments. A good example is Franklin Field Apartments. I don't think a lot of people know half of it is federal, the other half is state, down Franklin Field. They were up for Hope 6 years ago. They didn't get that Hope 6. If you look at Franklin Hill on the corner of Harvard and Blue Hill Ave, it was built brand new, torn down, built brand new. That was a Hope 6 grant from HUD. Franklin Field didn't get that grant. So the conditions of Franklin Field continue to deteriorate. One of the things I want to do as a state senator for the 2nd Suffolk District, let me just slow down and say that so folks can hear what I said. As the state senator for the 2nd Suffolk District, look at properties like Franklin Field. Do the same thing we did with the demonstration disposition program. Either demolish them, build them up brand new, transfer ownership to the tenants. I think what that does is it gives the tenants a sense of hope. They don't have to worry about where they're going to be living in the next 10 or 15 years. They don't have to worry about whether they're going to get an eviction notice. And they have an interest in owning that development. And so when you think about where we are in gentrification and you think about how tenants are being moved out of the city because they can't afford to live here, when you think about the study that the Boston Foundation did with Suffolk University just on Section 8 holders, that people of color who have Section 8 certificates, the vouchers, they're portable vouchers, they can move to different cities, are being discriminated against in the city of Boston when they seek an apartment and they go for an interview, that they're discriminated against 60% of them. So that's why they end up moving to Brockton or Taunton. All kinds of reasons are
because
given.
private landlords will
Absolutely.
will reject them, and we seem to think that that's because of their race.
And as regional council, not seem to,
Okay.
that's the only reason why many are being denied. We looked at that study while I was regional counsel at HUD, and we were trying to figure out an angle to sue some of the developments. It's a tough case because you have to take the owners individually.
Yeah.
You can't do a class action. That's a whole nother study. So I wanted to leave HUD to fight this battle outside of HUD. I'd been there 27 years. We finished the demonstration disposition program. Many folks don't know it, that Boston City Hospital, when Boston City Hospital was at its lowest peak, and folks were complaining about the health care service that they were getting in Boston City Hospital. And if you remember, there was a merger between Boston University and Boston City Hospital. Well, that merger happened because there was a HUD mortgage. I did the actual closing for that merger. The only closing I did in 27 years as HUD, to make sure the Boston City Hospital and Boston University Hospital merge in a way that those in the city of Boston, those in the 2nd Suffolk District, would have a high quality of health care. And if you look at the merger now, there are some patients over on the Boston University, East Canton Street. There are some that are at City Hospital, but the quality of health care has gone up tremendously. That wouldn't have happened without HUD and that mortgage stepping in. If you remember, it was failing. And so when I look at some of the things that I did, when the city of Boston and the Boston Housing Authority, the tenants in Boston Housing Authority, the McCormick Project in South Boston, and in Charlestown were being discriminated against. I looked at some boxes of evidence that they had, and I said, we've got to sue the city of Boston. We've got to sue the Boston Housing Authority. There was a tremendous opposition. God bless Mayor Menino, may he rest in peace. But we went toe-to-toe over that, and I sued the city of Boston and the Boston Housing Authority. I went to look for myself, and I walked through that development, the public housing in South Boston. I saw swastikas on their doors. Some of the people of color, the doors were tied from the outside locked, and they would throw firebombs in the apartments. If you remember, folks would come out, the cars would have feces all over them. And so I had to sue the city of Boston to stop that. We co-authored the Civil Rights Protection Plan to protect the rights of those that were living in the Boston Housing Authority properties. That Civil Rights Protection Plan went viral all over the country. Housing authorities across the country were calling us asking for that Civil Rights Protection Plan, because when we sued the city of Boston, that became a major suit. The city went to Washington. They went to the Secretary of HUD at the time. They asked to remove me as regional counsel. Washington stood firm behind me. Said, if you can handle Boston, we'll handle Washington. They went to Al Gore to try to get Al Gore to pressure the secretary to remove me. They didn't. We stood fast. We filed that suit. They removed it to federal court. In federal court, we sat down. We settled that case for $1.8 million. The interesting thing about that case, if you go look up the names of that case, you'll see Jane Doe. That was a case of Jane Doe's because we couldn't name the individuals in that case because they would be retaliated against. They feared for their life if we named them in that case. So that case was called the Jane Doe's. There were 13 of them against the city of Boston.
It's Politics and Grits with Kevin Peterson, Boston Praise Radio. We're talking to the Reverend Miniard Culpepper, who's running for state senate, 2nd Suffolk District. That's a district that the New Democracy Coalition was instrumental in crafting with the state legislature. Reverend, you talked about your role in terms of housing and, of course, around race. Shift a little bit just in terms of, I'd love to hear your comments around what's happening now and how you respond to some of these issues where you're senator today. The Boston Public Schools are on the verge of being taken over by the state because of its failing qualities in many ways. Many of those schools serve black families, Latino families, particularly within the district that you're running for. Weigh in. Mayor Wu seems to be at an impasse in terms of her engagement with the Department of Secondary and Early Education around whether or not the state should take over. If you were senator today, what measures would you take in engaging Mayor Wu and even the state power makers in education to address this issue of our failing schools?
Thank you for that question, Kevin, because one of the things we did when the State Education Commissioner had that hearing in the McCormick building several weeks ago, I went up to the McCormick building, protested with the Boston Teachers Union. They were protesting at the point, opposing receivership. I thought I was on the list to testify.
Let me interrupt you. So some of our listeners may not know. Receivership means that the state takes over. It takes the power away from local government, the city government, and begins to run things. We don't necessarily want that. So go ahead. I wanted to define that to the listeners a little bit.
Yeah, they take control of the school system. And the reason why it's important to oppose it and fight the state taking over the school system is because when you look at Lawrence, you look at other school systems that they have taken over, they have failed. It hasn't worked. The other thing that it does, when the state takes over the school system, it takes over the parents don't have the impact in terms of the decision making that they have now. It completely excludes the parents from the decision making process. And so when you look at state receivership, it's the wrong direction. As state senator, I would sit with the governor. I would make it clear to the governor. And sometimes you have to protest. Sometimes you have to make good trouble. We know what good trouble is all about. And sometimes you have to yell loud and clear. I thought I was on that list to testify at that hearing. I got a call the day before, and they said that I was no longer on that list. I went to the McCormick building. Nonetheless, I protested right side by side with the Boston Teachers Union. I went to the hearing. One of the city councilors made sure that I got in the hearing, that my presence was known. And I think that we give Michelle Wu, the new mayor, a chance to appoint a superintendent. I'm looking forward to an elected school committee. If you remember, when I went to Boston English High, I went to the Taft Junior High School in Brighton. We had an elected school committee. That's when we elected John O'Brien, one of the most prolific politicians in the city of Boston. Gene McGuire was on the school committee. We had representation in a way that we don't now. And we had that kind of representation because we were able to elect them. They weren't appointed by the mayor. They didn't have the loyalty to the mayor that the school committee now has. They had a loyalty to the community and the parents and the people in the community. So I'm looking forward to going back to the elected school committee. I think that's what works. I think that's what will make better schools in Boston, will bring the quality of education for the young folks. I believe that the young folks in Boston deserve the highest level of education that will meet their potential and their possibility, the highest quality of education. You got to remember, look, I'm a product of the Boston school system. I'm a product of English High. I went to Brandeis University. I went to Suffolk University. I went to Howard University Divinity School, out of the Boston school system. So I know it's possible to create a school system where the young folks can live to the potential of their possibility and reach the heights that they deserve or desire. You know, I've always wanted to be a lawyer. It didn't keep me from becoming a lawyer. But again, Kevin, even in high school, we had to fight. Louise Day Hicks, Pixie Palladino. We were protesting as high school students at English High. I still remember, I wasn't one of the ones that pulled that alarm, but I still remember that alarm being pulled, and we all left the school and went up to Franklin Park White Stadium and planned additional strategies to fight for a better education.
How would you characterize, as we go through some of these issues, how would you characterize the state of race in the city of Boston? Do as some contend that we are racially divided, and it's in some ways sort of tragic. When you look at some of the statistics, healthcare, the housing segregation, neighborhood segregation that you talked about, even wealth, for some it's clear that Boston has not addressed the issue of race in the way that it should. How would you assess, even if you were state senator today, how would you assess, and what things would you begin to start doing?
Well, it's interesting. When you talk about wealth inequality, I taught a law school class at Suffolk University last year. Housing in America was the title of it. The effects and remedies of unconstitutional housing segregation.
Yes.
One of the things that I taught the students was that wealth was created years ago when the country and different states started developing single-family housing. That was after public housing. If you remember, public housing, people of color were discriminated against with regard to public housing. They weren't even let into public housing. And when they did, the public housing was separated. Even Mission Hill, there was a black development down Mission Hill for black tenants and a white one for white tenants. They had two separate developments in Mission Hill for public housing. And so when you really think about wealth inequality, you think about Levittown. Good example is Levittown when they built the single-family housing in New York. And HUD is liable for much of the discrimination and the wealth inequality that was created. Because when they built Levittown, the developer would have given some of the mortgages to people of color. The federal government said, if you do that, we won't give you the subsidy that you need to build those developments. That took place all over the country.
Yeah.
And so black folks were excluded from owning homes that many of the white families own that they use to build wealth.
So what singular thing would you do? I know race is an elusive and expansive kind of issue, but what singular thing would you do upon being sworn in office next January? What singular thing would you do around race as it's impacting what would be your district? Just to start off.
So it's interesting because one of the things that's happening now, many young folks, the American dream is owning a home that we've been told.
It'll be home ownership.
But we've been excluded in a major way. I think for the young folks, I'd start with a program, and there are many programs that I would start. I would start with legislation I call Community Sustainability Act. That taking the CRA to an environmental level where banks, mortgage company, equity firms, they would all have to contribute to the different parts of our community that need a loan or grant for instance, just to insulate their homes. Yeah. But let me get back to the youth.
It sounds like home ownership would be key in terms of addressing the racial divide. Does Boston, in your mind, is it still a racist city? I'm not sure if you respond to that.
I will. Let me just get back to this proposal first for young folks, and then I'm going to come back to Boston as being a city of racism, because I was raised here. We fought at Carson Beach, and that's why we went to Carson Beach with some of the faith leaders several weeks ago to make it clear that the young folks, we fought, Brother Wall, to make Carson Beach. I remember we went to Carson Beach with Mel King. I still remember the horses that the MDC police, they don't have MDC police anymore, divided us from the South Boston folks that were throwing rocks and bottles.
Has the city changed much since those times as we are experiencing racism in 2022? Has there been much of a change?
We've got a long way to go. There has been some change. Boston is still considered a racist city. We still have a long way to go because we've been excluded from being involved in the development and creation of wealth in our community. If you look at contracting with the city of Boston, and you look at where we are in contracting, it makes no sense.
Less than 2% of all the procurement contracts.
1%. It makes no sense if you're the majority people of color in this city to have 1% of the contracts. It's ludicrous. It's unbelievable. And I think that's part of the racism and the wealth development. We need to begin to develop wealth in our communities. When you develop wealth, then you begin to increase equal opportunities in the city.
We're going to go to a call in the middle, but you wanted to answer that question around youth, right?
Yeah.
Youth.
And this program that we would create. Because I think it's important that we create programs with state dollars that would attract youth to stay in the city of Boston. Many of the youth, including my son, had to buy a house in Brockton, and he's a lawyer with HHS. He,
couldn't afford it, really.
Couldn't afford it. Let me just get to the program. So I would create a program that would, number one, when a student that graduates from the Boston University College System, Boston, UMass Boston, or Dartmouth, and they graduate with a loan, that we forgive that debt. We forget that student debt, right? My program would, number one, forgive that student debt, and then create a low-interest mortgage program to give them a low-interest loan so that they can buy a house in the city of Boston. We have to do things like that in order and create programs, intentional programs, to begin to create wealth. If you look at where we are today, and if you look at how far we've come, even though we had 1% of contracting in the city of Boston, can you imagine what would happen if the city would give just 25% of contracts to minority businesses in the city of Boston? And can you imagine 50% contracts in the city of Boston to people of color? And so we've got to be intentional. And as state senator, I would be intentional about creating programs that would create wealth in the city of Boston.
Okay, well, let's go. It's heating up. Let's go to some calls. Caller, good morning, Deco. You have a question or a comment to our guest this morning, Reverend Miniard Culpepper, Pleasant Hill Baptist Church. He's running for the state senate what have you to say, Deco? Deco, you there? Okay, we'll go to Jamal. Good morning, Jamal. A question for or comment regarding Miniard Culpepper.
Oh, I thought Deco was going. No.
He stepped off. I guess you're up.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
So I just good morning to everybody. First
Good morning.
of all, and because of what just recently happened in Boston City Council with the, I guess, a move towards the apology of the effects of racism and slavery, all this type of thing. I like to get closer to where it is, and Reverend Miniard, you brought up a couple points. So you, even in your young adulthood, right, you dealt with the Louise Day Hicks and the so on and so forth, and you remember I, as a kid of the 70s and later the 80s, was on the next leg of that, where we weren't running from them, we were fighting and all this, okay? But I remember some of the same people. We all remember the seminal historical piece by the great Henry Hampton, rest in peace, Eyes on the Prize. And that particular segment on Boston that actually exposed a lot of what was going on in the 70s, and these people are still around. So I bring that up to say that when the city council just did this thing, I wonder if the city council, and I wrote them a letter, if the city council is going to be willing to denounce the former positions of Louise Day Hicks, Jim Kelly, and Dapper O'Neill, and would they be willing to unname the zoning board, the hearing appeals room, whatever it is, that's named after Dapper O'Neill, and anything that's named after Jim Kelly, which I believe is a bridge in South Boston.
Yeah.
Because when I worked in the council in 1998, under then Councilor Garrett Saunders, I am a witness to both of them using the N-word in city council chambers. And I believe both Councilor Yancey and former Councilor Garrett Saunders would also confirm that. So I wonder, is the city council presently willing to deal with the past racism of not the city in general, but the city council specifically? And would you, as a candidate and as a state rep or senator rather, would you support efforts in recognizing Boston's own specific racism?
Reverend Culpepper?
Absolutely, Jamal. Good to hear you this morning. And the interesting thing about that, Jamal, and I ran Bruce Boland's campaign when Bruce ran and went for the city council. And it was interesting because one of the things that I always do when I run a campaign is, I have precinct workers that go into the precinct after the election, and they take down the number of votes. They call out the number of votes from the precinct workers. They're authorized to go into those polls, and they bring their numbers back. And so I have my sheet, because I know how many votes they called out. I have a listing of all of those votes by ward and by precinct.
Yeah.
When I looked at the total that I had, it was different from the total that the city had. And so I had just graduated from law school. I had just passed the bar. So I went down to City Hall the next morning, and I asked to see the rolls that came back from the precincts, because they have them right there in the election department at City Hall. I don't want to put out the commissioner at that point, but look, I challenged him. He said, in order to see this, you've got to be a lawyer. And he was looking at me, young black man. I said, well, I'm a lawyer. I just passed the bar. So you've got to show them to me. When they showed them to me, they had Bruce Boland in 10th. Jim Kelly was in 9th. When they showed me the numbers, I compared them to my numbers. They were different from the numbers that came out in the paper. They had shaved off some of the votes from Bruce Boland, put Jim Kelly in 9th, put Bruce Boland in 10th. So I said to him, look, we're prepared. Kevin White was mayor at the time.
Yeah.
And Bruce didn't know I was doing this. We're prepared to file suit.
Yeah.
Right? They got all upset. And I said, we're going to the press. The next day, it came out in the paper. It put Bruce Boland in 9th and put Jim Kelly in 10th. They turned it back around. It never hit the paper what they did, but I still have the news reports. I still have the numbers at home
You think,
about what they did. My point is that that's how we have been excluded
Yeah.
and cheated and treated in the city of Boston.
To Jamal's point, though, do you
To
think,
Jamal's point,
do you think
I would support
the current city council should renounce
absolutely,
any past
absolutely,
council,
absolutely,
including perhaps renaming the Kelly Bridge in South Boston to something else?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I think when you look at the fight that we fought,
Yeah.
and you look at where we are, we still have to make much more good trouble. But I think
Preachers go too long on the radio. Let me go to the caller. Next, Deco, you're on the line. Deco, you have a question or
Kevin, you got to at least let me finish. We'll go to Deco, but after Deco.
But we're up against the 9 o'clock hour, so we don't have much time, and I want to get a couple calls in. Deco, you have a comment or a question? Quickly, please.
I both have a comment and a question, and I cannot stress this comment enough, but we, the people, are the state, not they, the politicians.
Okay.
That's a factor. I want to make that perfectly clear. And my question is to the candidate is, what are you going to do to help specifically for black people, only to create policies for black people? Well,
Okay, you got a black agenda.
Deco,
right?
thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. One of the things I've been doing as a candidate, Deco, is I've been going to different parts of the 2nd Suffolk District, and I've been listening to folks talk about their needs. Every place I go, they're talking about needs. Deco, and I think as a state senator, I learned it in Congress when I was chief of staff of Congresswoman Collins. I would fly out to Detroit with her every weekend, and we would go talk to the residents in the congressional district in Detroit. She would then come back to Washington. I would take the notes. We would draft legislation based on what we heard in the district. I'm doing the same thing now. I'm talking to folks. Folks are telling me what their needs are. As state senator, I'll take their specific needs back to the state house, and I'll develop legislation based on what I heard those needs are, so they will be able to, the resources will come right back to the district. That's not happening now. That's why I'm running. I'm running to bring resources back to the 2nd Suffolk District. I'm willing to go up and make good trouble to fight for it. But I think you start with listening to folks tell you what their needs are. Then you go back to Beacon Hill. You develop the legislation based on what they said their needs are, so the resources come directly back to them.
Thank you.
And
thank you, Deco, for the call. Where are you, Pastor, around the issue related to reparations? In Boston City Council now, there's a bill that would create a race commission that for 2 years will look at the extent of racial harm and then make recommendations around reparations. Where do you stand on the issue?
Reparations are, and I believe that there should be reparations, but I believe that there should be reparations in a way that make us whole, because we built this country on our back. So you just can't have reparations giving folks $25,000 or 40 acres and a mule. You need reparations across the board. And when I say across the board, I mean creating the wealth that we were denied from working in the fields to build this country on our backs. If you look at the wealth of this country and the prosperity of the city of Boston, it's because of the work that we did many years ago. So when you look at reparations, I'm for reparations across the board. We can't just have someone deciding to give us a check and call that reparations. A good example is our young folks are going to these universities, like Harvard universities. They're being judged when they submit their applications. They're in a pool of applicants with white students that are applied who are the descendants of slave owners, and they're competing on the same level with them, having been denied the right to read. If you remember, we weren't allowed to read. If you look at where we have come from the time of slavery to where we are now, our young folks are competing with folks that are benefiting from the economics that were developed because of the work that we did to build this country. And so simple things like when you look at, and it's amazing, the Supreme Court, and you look at affirmative action and the argument about affirmative action, there shouldn't be any argument about young folks that are qualified going to Harvard University, and you don't need a scholarship. It should be tuition fee. Any black student that gets into Harvard University, Boston University, Boston College, University of New Hampshire, Suffolk University, Emerson, they should be able to go free because of what we've experienced in being denied the ability to even be admitted to those schools. There should be no question that if after what they went through, after what we went through as a people, they should be admitted tuition free.
And that's a form of repair and reparation. We only have about 5 minutes.
Okay, let me just finish.
Okay.
The other thing about that's interesting is they're graduating with student loans more than their white counterparts. So the white students are benefiting from the economics that the slave, and I hate to use that word slave,
enslaved.
Enslaved. They're benefiting, right? They're being able to pay cash for their tuition with money that came from forced labor.
Over time.
Yes, and our young folks are graduating with more student debt than they are. I say you've got to give those young folks an opportunity.
So that's a form of reparation, a form of repair. Some have made the point about there being 146 businesses and shops at Faneuil Hall, Slave Traders Hall. None of them are black-owned. As Senator, you would push for repair there in terms of ownership?
I mean, look, if the city controls it, there's no reason why there aren't black businesses there that the city promotes and allowed to go there. I'm sure there are black businesses in the city of Boston, especially in the 2nd Suffolk District, and I would push for it, that want to be down Faneuil Hall. Change your name, but even if they don't, the city should make it possible for them to be able to be part of the prosperity that the city of Boston is experiencing by having a shop in Faneuil Hall. Let me just get back to the reparations because I wanted to get back to places like Levittown in New York, where single-family homes were built that excluded black folks from being able to get a mortgage. HUD has these single-family homes that come into the inventory. When someone defaults, HUD will pay the insurance off, even on the single-family homes, right? Boston has a right of refusal of any HUD home that comes into the city. So I say you make those homes available to folks, low-interest loans. I know they have some programs there, but I think we have to start being intentional about creating wealth in the black community that was denied the ability and the same opportunity for so many years. And as state senator, I'm prepared to go up to Beacon Hill, craft some legislation that will do exactly that. We need to have a senator that knows how to write legislation, that knows how to fight legislation, and that knows how to get legislation passed to bring resources back to the 2nd Suffolk District. And as the state senator from the 2nd Suffolk District, I'm prepared to do that. I'm prepared to go to Beacon Hill, and I'm prepared to make good trouble to bring resources to this district that is not now experiencing.
Reverend Miniard Culpepper, pastor for over 25 years at Pleasant Hill Baptist Church in Roxbury, running for the Senate. First of many interviews we'll have with the senatorial candidates, and at some point we'll get them all to debate on this program. What a wonderful hour of engaged conversation and discussion around what the future of the newly drawn 2nd Suffolk District, the Senate District. Thank you for listening. Politics and Grits every Thursday morning, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. We'll see you next week with another guest where we're talking about politics with the Grits. Have a good morning.